Listen closely because what I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change how you see the world around you. Thomas Hobbes understood something that most men spend their entire lives failing to grasp, that human nature is not some noble, elevated thing that society has taught you to believe in. It is raw, primal, and governed by one fundamental truth: the pursuit of power and the avoidance of weakness. In his masterwork Leviathan, Hobbes laid bare the reality that life in its natural state is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. But here's what separates the strong from the weak. The strong understand this truth and use it, while the weak deny it and become victims of it. You walk through life surrounded by men who have never learned to see what Hobbes saw. They live in delusion, wrapped in comfortable lies about human goodness and fairness, and because of this blindness, they expose themselves every single day. They broadcast their weakness through behaviors so obvious that once you learn to recognize them, you'll never be able to unsee them. These are not just character flaws or minor social missteps. These are fundamental indicators that reveal the core weakness that runs through a man's entire being, like a crack in a foundation that will eventually bring down the whole structure. The first behavior that instantly exposes weak men is their desperate need to be liked by everyone. Watch them carefully, and you'll see it everywhere. They apologize when they have done nothing wrong. They agree with opinions they privately despise. They laugh at jokes that aren't funny, and nod along with ideas that insult their intelligence. They bend and twist themselves into whatever shape they think will earn approval, never realizing that this very desperation broadcasts their weakness louder than any words could. Hobbes understood that in the state of nature, survival belongs to those who command respect, not those who beg for affection. The weak man who needs to be liked by everyone is essentially advertising that he has no power of his own, no internal strength to draw from, and no capacity to stand alone when necessary. This need for universal approval stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of human nature. These men believe that if they are just nice enough, accommodating enough, agreeable enough, the world will reward them with safety and acceptance. They have never learned what Hobbes knew instinctively, that respect and fear are far more reliable than love, and that strength commands what weakness can only beg for. When you observe a man who cannot say no, who cannot disagree, who cannot stand for anything that might make someone uncomfortable, you are looking at a man who has surrendered his personal sovereignty. He has made himself a slave to the opinions of others, and slavery is the ultimate expression of powerlessness. The strong man, in contrast, understands that being disliked by some people is not just inevitable, but necessary. He knows that having clear boundaries, definite opinions, and unwavering principles will naturally create friction with those who lack these qualities. He accepts this as the price of integrity and personal power. He would rather be respected by a few than liked by many, because he understands that respect is earned through strength, while likability is often achieved through weakness. The moment you stop needing everyone's approval, you reclaim a fundamental piece of your power that weak men give away every single day. The second behavior that reveals weakness is the inability to handle conflict or confrontation. You see these men everywhere, shrinking away from difficult conversations, avoiding necessary confrontations, and choosing temporary peace over lasting resolution. They will endure disrespect, manipulation, and abuse, rather than face the discomfort of standing up for themselves. They convince themselves that avoiding conflict makes them noble or enlightened, but what they're really doing is advertising their fundamental inability to defend their interests, their values, or their boundaries. Hobbes recognized that conflict is not an aberration in human relations, but an inevitable and necessary part of life. In his view, the very essence of political power comes from the ability to compel others through the threat of consequences. The man who cannot engage in conflict has essentially disarmed himself in a world where everyone else is armed. He has chosen to be prey in a world full of predators. This doesn't mean you should go looking for fights or create unnecessary drama, but it means you must be prepared to engage when your interests, your values, or your dignity are at stake. Watch how weak men handle situations where someone crosses a line. They make excuses for the aggressor. They blame themselves for somehow provoking the conflict. They retreat into passive-aggressive behavior or silent resentment rather than addressing the issue directly. They tell themselves that the other person will eventually realize their mistake and change their behavior on their own. This is pure fantasy, a child's understanding of how the world works. People do what they can get away with, and the man who won't enforce his boundaries is essentially giving everyone permission to violate them. The strong man understands that conflict, properly handled, is not destructive, but clarifying. It establishes boundaries, communicates expectations, and demands respect. He doesn't seek out confrontation, but he doesn't run from it either. He knows that one firm, direct conversation can prevent months or years of ongoing problems. He understands that people respect those who will defend themselves and their interests, and they unconsciously despise those who won't. This is not about being aggressive or hostile. It's about being clear and unwavering when clarity is required. The third and perhaps most revealing behavior is the tendency to make excuses instead of taking responsibility. Listen to how weak men talk about their lives, their failures, their circumstances. Everything is someone else's fault. The economy, their boss, their family, their education, their lack of opportunities, the unfairness of the system. They have a ready-made explanation for every shortcoming and every missed opportunity, and none of these explanations ever point back to themselves. This is not just intellectual dishonesty, it's a fundamental abdication of personal power. Hobbes understood that power is essentially the ability to cause effects in the world, to shape circumstances rather than merely react to them. The man who constantly makes excuses is declaring that he has no real agency, no capacity to influence outcomes, no power to change his situation. He is positioning himself as a victim of forces beyond his control, which might provide temporary emotional comfort, but also guarantees permanent powerlessness. After all, if nothing is ever your fault, then you also have no power to fix anything. This excuse-making behavior reveals a deeper truth about weak men. They are more interested in protecting their ego than in improving their circumstances. Admitting responsibility requires acknowledging that you could have done better, which implies that you have the capacity to do better in the future. But this acknowledgement comes with the burden of having to actually do better. It's much easier to blame external forces and maintain the illusion that you're already doing everything possible. The weak man chooses the comfort of victimhood over the responsibility of power. The strong man takes a fundamentally different approach. He operates from the assumption that he is the primary force shaping his life circumstances. This doesn't mean he ignores genuine obstacles or external factors, but he focuses on what he can control rather than what he cannot. When something goes wrong, his first question is not, who is to blame, but what could I have done differently? This isn't about self-flagellation or taking on inappropriate guilt. It's about maintaining a sense of agency and personal power in all circumstances. Understanding these three behaviors gives you a powerful tool for navigating the world. You can quickly identify the weak men around you and adjust your expectations and strategies accordingly. You know not to rely on the approval seeker when difficult decisions need to be made. You understand that the conflict avoider will buckle under pressure when you need support. You recognize that the excuse maker will never take responsibility for his part in any shared endeavor. This knowledge protects you from disappointment and helps you invest your time and energy in relationships with stronger, more reliable people. But more importantly, this understanding forces you to examine your own behavior with brutal honesty. Do you catch yourself seeking approval from people whose opinions shouldn't matter? Are you avoiding necessary confrontations because they make you uncomfortable? Are you making excuses for areas of your life where you should be taking responsibility? If so, you're not just displaying weakness. You're actively undermining your own power and effectiveness in the world. The path to strength requires abandoning these behaviors completely, not just modifying them or doing them less frequently. You cannot partially care about everyone's opinion or occasionally avoid conflict or sometimes make excuses. These are binary choices. Either you are sovereign over your own life or you are not. Either you have the courage to face reality or you prefer comfortable illusions. Either you take responsibility for your circumstances or you surrender that responsibility to forces beyond your control. Hobbes taught us that the fundamental choice in life is between security and freedom, between the safety of submission and the risks of self-governance. Weak men consistently choose security, even when that security is illusory. They prefer the known discomfort of weakness to the unknown challenges of strength. They would rather be safe slaves than free warriors. This choice shapes everything about how they move through the world. And once you understand this, their behavior becomes entirely predictable. The strong man makes the opposite choice at every opportunity. He chooses the discomfort of standing alone over the false comfort of going along with the crowd. He chooses the risk of conflict over the certainty of being taken advantage of. He chooses the burden of responsibility over the temporary relief of blame. These choices are not always pleasant, and they don't always lead to immediate rewards. but they compound over time into genuine personal power and self-respect. This is not about becoming cruel or heartless or indifferent to others. True strength includes the capacity for compassion, loyalty, and generosity. But it also includes the wisdom to recognize when these virtues are being exploited and the courage to withdraw them when necessary. The strong man can afford to be generous because he is not giving from a position of weakness or neediness. He can afford to be compassionate because he is not seeking validation through his kindness. He can afford to be loyal because he has chosen his loyalties carefully and maintains them from strength rather than desperation. The world is full of people who will test your boundaries, challenge your resolve, and attempt to exploit any weakness they perceive. This is not evil. It's simply human nature operating according to the principles Hobbes identified centuries ago. People pursue their interests and push until they meet resistance. The man who provides no resistance will be pushed until he breaks. The man who provides inconsistent resistance will be constantly tested. Only the man who provides clear, consistent, predictable resistance will be left alone to pursue his own interests in peace. This understanding changes how you interact with everyone around you. You become more selective about whose approval you seek, focusing only on people whose opinions are actually valuable and relevant to your goals. You become more willing to engage in difficult conversations early before small problems become large ones. You become more focused on what you can control and less interested in complaining about what you cannot. These changes don't happen overnight, but they compound quickly once you commit to them fully. The transformation from weak to strong is not about adopting a new persona or putting on an act. It's about aligning your behavior with the reality of how the world actually works rather than how you wish it worked. It's about accepting responsibility for your own life and circumstances, not because you're to blame for everything that happens to you, but because taking responsibility is the only path to having any real power to change things. Most men never make this transformation because they never see these behaviors clearly in themselves. They're too invested in their self-image as good, reasonable, accommodating people to recognize how their accommodation is actually undermining them. They mistake weakness for virtue and strength for vice. They have been taught that conflict is bad, that wanting approval is normal, and that circumstances are largely beyond their control. These teachings serve the interests of those who benefit from having a population of weak, compliant, easily manipulated men, but they destroy the interests of any individual man who accepts them. The brutal truth is that the world does not reward weakness, no matter how well-intentioned it might be. Good intentions without strength are worthless. Kindness without boundaries is exploitation waiting to happen. Generosity without discernment is just another way of being taken advantage of. The strong man learns to combine positive virtues with personal power, creating a foundation that allows him to be truly generous, truly kind, and truly good, because he's operating from strength rather than weakness. When you stop needing everyone's approval, you discover who actually respects you and who is just taking advantage of your desperation for acceptance. When you stop avoiding conflict, you find that most problems can be resolved quickly and clearly with direct communication. When you stop making excuses, you gain the power to actually change your circumstances rather than just complaining about them. These discoveries are initially uncomfortable because they shatter illusions you may have held for years, but they ultimately lead to a cleaner, more honest, more powerful way of living. The weak men around you will not understand or appreciate these changes. They may even try to pull you back into old patterns of behavior through guilt, manipulation, or social pressure. This is natural and predictable. Your strength highlights their weakness in ways that make them uncomfortable. Your willingness to set boundaries challenges their belief that accommodation is the highest virtue. Your refusal to make excuses forces them to confront their own responsibility for their circumstances. They preferred you when you were weak because your weakness made them feel better about their own. But the strong men in your life, the ones worth knowing and associating with, will recognize and respect the changes immediately. They will appreciate dealing with someone who says what he means what he says, and takes responsibility for his own life. They will value your directness, your reliability, and your unwillingness to be manipulated or taken advantage of. These relationships, built on mutual respect and strength rather than mutual weakness and neediness, become the foundation for everything worthwhile you will accomplish in life. The choice is always yours, and it's always available. You can continue operating from the three behaviors that mark weak men: seeking approval, avoiding conflict, and making excuses, and the world will continue to treat you accordingly. Or you can adopt the behaviors of strong men, focusing on respect rather than approval, addressing problems directly rather than avoiding them, and taking responsibility for your circumstances rather than blaming external forces. The world will treat you differently the moment you make this change, because the world responds to strength and exploits weakness with mechanical consistency. This is not a temporary adjustment or a new strategy to try out. This is a fundamental reorientation of how you understand yourself and your place in the world. It requires abandoning comfortable illusions about human nature and accepting the harder truths that Hobbes identified. It means accepting that you live in a world where strength is respected and weakness is exploited, where clear boundaries are honored and unclear boundaries are violated, where personal responsibility leads to personal power and excuse-making leads to permanent victimhood. The man who makes this transformation discovers something remarkable. That strength is not a burden, but a liberation. When you no longer need everyone's approval, you become free to pursue what actually matters to you. When you no longer avoid conflict, you discover that most conflicts can be resolved quickly and that people actually prefer dealing with someone who will address issues directly. When you no longer make excuses, you gain the power to actually change the things that need changing in your life. This is not about becoming harsh or unfeeling. It's about becoming effective and authentic in a world that rewards both qualities. Remember this. Every moment you spend seeking approval from people who don't matter is a moment stolen from pursuing goals that do matter. Every conflict you avoid out of weakness creates a larger conflict that will eventually be unavoidable. Every excuse you make is a declaration that you have no power to improve your circumstances. These behaviors don't just limit your effectiveness, they actively undermine it. They don't just reveal weakness, they create more weakness. They become self-reinforcing patterns that grow stronger every time you engage in them. The path forward is clear, even if it's not easy. Stop seeking universal approval and start earning selective respect. Stop avoiding necessary conflicts and start addressing problems when they're small and manageable. Stop making excuses for your circumstances and start taking responsibility for changing them. Do this consistently, without exception, and watch how quickly the world begins to treat you differently. More importantly, watch how quickly you begin to see yourself differently. This is the essence of what Hobbes understood about human nature and power. The strong create their own security through strength, while the weak depend on others for a security that never truly comes. The strong shape their circumstances through action, while the weak react to circumstances they believe they cannot control. The strong take responsibility for their lives and therefore have the power to change them, while the weak blame others and therefore remain powerless to improve anything. The choice is yours, and it's available to you right now. Choose strength and accept both its responsibilities and its rewards. Choose to see the world as it actually is rather than as you wish it were. Choose to become the kind of man who commands respect rather than begs for approval, who faces problems directly rather than hoping they'll disappear, who takes responsibility for his life rather than blaming others for his circumstances. Make these choices consistently, and you'll discover that strength is not something you have to fake or pretend. It becomes who you are, and the world will respond accordingly.